paradigms in their industry and changing the lives of those. Each episode is designed to enrich the lives of you, our audience, and inform you about the resources we're providing to our clients. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode of Breakthrough Today. The topic today is divorce and money, and our guest today is Loreine Smith, CPA, CFP, and a whole bunch of other titles, and also owner of Lion's Edge Advisory. Welcome, Loreine.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So tell us a bit, if you would, about how you got into, I guess, essentially it's finance, right?
Yes. How I started my career in finance. Is that your question?
Yeah. I mean, what was interesting to you about finance, and then how did you ultimately end up becoming interested in conflict coaching?
Well, I think it's a journey and a path, right? But I would say initially I just liked finance. And I can remember just kind of taking my first accounting class and loving it. Right. And so I started the path because I had a lot of passion. I actually was very passionate about tax at one particular point in time in my career. And so it was a passion. I enjoyed finance. I still enjoy finance. It's fascinating. You just look at economics and how it affects the world in general. To me, that's very fascinating, right? There is a human component and there's a financial component in economics. And so, while I'm not an economist, it affects what I do as a CPA and it affects what I do as a CFP. And I just became fascinated by how numbers work. And then I moved into the fact that numbers have patterns, and that as numbers have patterns, because I was in forensic accounting, I noticed that people had patterns. And so I started putting together that, oh, people have patterns and numbers have patterns. So while I can ask somebody to do something, if they're in a pattern, they're not necessarily going to do it unless we can make them aware of the pattern they're in and help them shift to a new pattern. Right? As opposed to being in the pattern they had always been in. So it just sort of moved from one fascination to another fascination. And part of that has to do with the fact that I have a curious mind. I had raised a child who would be considered to be on the spectrum. So I had to grow as a human being. You can't do that if you're not willing to grow, if you're not willing to look at whether there's another way to get something done. If you're going to stay in the old paradigm, you're not going to have much success raising a child who thinks differently than we think. So that then moved into another level of skill set that I developed when I did that, because you really did have to develop a skill set of bringing information to people and bringing that in a way that you did not escalate a situation, that you de-escalated a situation. So you learned a lot of de-escalation skills. You learned a lot of ownership of your words, right? Which it's not what you did, it's how I am reacting to this moment. So I learned a lot of skill sets, and I wanted to bring those skill sets more to what I do. And that moved into coaching, into consulting, into mediation, because I'm much more congruent with people finding, especially, and this is your word, an intimate relationship. I love that terminology because that really does support the mission we're on, which is if somebody is in an intimate relationship, going into a courtroom with everybody's knives and weapons and I was a weapon in a courtroom. That's what I am. When you walk into that environment, it's not an environment that is conducive to you finding a peaceful resolution that truly resonates with you. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to resolve it if you're going through that kind of mediation. So if you can sit down with somebody, if you can still have a dialogue with your partner, then I think it's something to think about, to make it the first step, and to not try to do it all in a day, to not try to end a relationship in one single day. It's just, if you want a conducive ending and if you want your ending to be congruent, it's important you understand the options that you're choosing. And I don't think you do that when you're in a great deal of stress. And so it just became important to me to help people reach a resolution they could live with because I saw so many resolutions that weren't livable, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Well, that's
Yeah.
you're speaking
So,
my language now, right? So,
yeah, I
um,
mean, it's just a growth.
yeah, exactly. But it's so much more helpful to allow people the option to basically regroup, gather their center, right, and then choose a process that flows at the pace they can handle and
Yeah.
gives them the options and the ability, empowers them really to have the ability to make agreements that work for their particular life. So let's talk about that in the setting of money. What sort of services do you provide to your clients?
I offer several services. I offer financial coaching. And financial coaching, I would say, is taking somebody to usually somebody is in a form of confusion or chaos, or I just don't know what all of this is, right? It's important to me that there's an education component because the most important thing an advisor can remember, it's not my money, it's your money. And so it's important to me that you decide what you want to do with what is yours, not me making a decision for you. It's not mine, it's yours. And so I don't want to take your power. I want you to come in and take your own power, right? And the only way I can do that is to ensure that I have given you the necessary confidence to make the decisions that are right for you, to give you the knowledge that you need. So there's a listening piece, there's an assessment piece, and then we kind of move from there at whatever pace we need to move from, depending upon the scope, right? Is it a small scope? Is it a larger scope? How much data is involved. But one of the first places we start out with coaching or consulting or anything finance is what is the data? You know, we do a data gathering piece. We have to get a snapshot or a picture. And one thing that we call that is a balance sheet, right? What is your assets? What are your liabilities? What is your income, which is an income statement? And we kind of flow from there. And then we get real about what your realistic options are. What do you want to do, but what can you do with what you have right now and what steps might you want to take? Then if we add a layer on that, which is conflict coaching, because I rarely do a conflict coaching engagement that doesn't involve some kind of financial component because that's my background, right? And so the two of them kind of come together and we can act as an anchor because in conflict, that's a wave. You may go in feeling great and when the meeting is over, you don't feel as great necessarily, right? So many emotions come up. It's going to feel like gunk for a while until you kind of move through, you know, it's like being on a raft. You're going to be on the raft and you're going to flow from one endpoint to another endpoint. But in between those 2 points, you can have some waves that come over your raft unexpectedly. You can have some things. And so the waters can be choppy and sometimes the waters are smooth, but it's never the same from day to day in conflict because of the you have a layer of emotion on top of all of that conflict. And that one particular asset that you may be talking about may have a lot of emotion attached to it, right? And so one of the things we have to do is to detangle you from what are the little things that are holding you attached to something. What is it really about? So we get to the thing behind the thing behind the thing in conflict. So conflict to me is a conflict coaching to me is very special. Because we're really getting to the depth of who you are as a person and how you want to walk something that can be really challenging to do with any kind of grace. You can watch a lot of people walk it poorly, but to walk it with some kind of grace and your personal integrity system that you have, really kind of bringing you back to that, you know, that's kind of our goal to bring you back. How do you want to show up? You can't change how somebody else shows up, but you can change how you show up. And so,
Right,
and you can change how you talk about the subject matter as well, right? You cannot push somebody's buttons, right? You
right.
can stay in the high ground. And so conflict to me is really special. In addition to that, I do business valuation work. I also work as a neutral. And a neutral's role is an educational role, in my opinion. It's talking about what is here. It's talking about what the options are. It's talking about what consequences of the options are. But I'm never pulling somebody's power. I'm never making the decision for them. I mean, the most important thing I can tell you is to make a decision from your anchor, from your core, but don't let anybody push you in that. And in certain situations, you have somebody pushing, and if you get yourself in a situation where you go into the discomfort of being pushed, that tends to be something you later regret. And so what we do is to keep you out of that. You're feeling it, we got it, but you don't have to act from it, right? You don't have to act from feeling pushed.
Yeah,
So,
it's super interesting because I find most mediation clients, frankly, separate mediation from therapy, which I think is appropriate, right?
mhm.
But if we start to get too personal, then I've had clients push back and say, "Hey, that's more for therapy, right?" And I try and explain that what it's really about is communication, as far as I can
Yes,
tell, right? In my
yes,
setting, and so we're not trying to go back in the past and fix anything that happened. We just are trying to understand what's causing the communication to break down. And it does sometimes, I think, to clients feel a little bit like therapy, only because you're pushing emotions, right? I mean, emotional buttons are being pushed, and that feels like therapy, right? And it's uncomfortable for people. At the same time, I can tell you that, at least in my mediations, when people get to the edge of that emotion, it's so amazing because once they have understanding, there is this tremendous, it's like the curtains open up, right? And people can then start to compromise without fear of being, whatever their fear was before, right?
right.
Shut down, ignored, taken advantage of. It's almost, it's just like this whole exhale in the room after somebody reaches one of those emotional points. And then the real results start to happen. So I really appreciate the fact that you say, to go at your own pace, but also don't be afraid to open up. And one of the things that I'm sure you do too is try and encourage people to understand that it's a safe space. It's confidential, right?
It is very confidential. Now, I have confidential requirements as a CPA. I also have confidential requirements as a CFP, and there are confidentiality requirements with regard to mediation. So, I don't know of a situation where somebody that has the designations that I have would violate that confidentiality and be able to get away with
Yeah.
it. It's just not possible. And I mean, you really shouldn't be doing this work if you think you need to talk to somebody about it, because the reality is what happens in a room, what is says in a room stays in that room. It's not my job to talk to other people about it. It's my job to help you explore. It's an exploratory process. And you brought up emotion. Well, my it's been my take on it that it does not matter if it's an estate issue, if it's a divorce issue, if it's happening in a courtroom, that emotion is still there. That emotion, and sometimes the other party may be using their lawyer to deal with emotion they can't deal with, which is, I'm really mad at that person. And rather than have your lawyer hit that person, I'd much rather you just say, I'm really mad at this person for what they've done. Now, I will qualify with, there are some people that don't belong in mediation. If there's certain things that cannot be resolved that way. For instance, if you've got physical abuse, I'm not really sure that you can ever create a safe space for that person, right? If you've
No.
got, and you may disagree, and that's okay. I mean, I'm
Well,
certainly not
it's
an
an
expert on it.
ongoing.
It's a sociologist and a psychologist issue to resolve. But I do, if you've got somebody you think is stealing from you, and there's a lot of theft, there can be situations where you have to go through a different process, and mediation is not going to be a process that works. But for 90% of the public, mediation is a great process done
Yeah.
the right way, done in a way where you are truly given space to figure out what you want to do, to figure out. I mean, there's a word called decoupling, and I don't know if that's the best word or not, but the reality is you are pulling apart what you built with somebody.
Yeah.
And if it's a family situation, we're talking about estates, it's the same thing. You are still separating assets. You are still moving things around. And oftentimes, those assets have an emotional component that is attached to them. And you at least have to acknowledge why you're feeling so bad about letting the other party have that asset, which it might be that, that was our lakefront property and I have so many great memories I don't want to let go of. And that kind of dialogue, it isn't required to happen, but you will get to a faster and better resolution if you're willing to own it. If you're
Yeah.
willing to own why you're feeling that way. Sometimes you don't even know. And so that's why we ask the questions, right? That's why we listen, because we're really just trying to hear those chords that we can help you move to help you get your resolution that you can live with 20 years, 10 years, 15 years. Otherwise, you're going to be back in a courtroom and you're going to be there with another lawyer or, another finance person. And that really doesn't help you. I mean, I will tell you, I made the most money I ever made doing litigation support on mediations that were forced and not done well. And you have to come back. So that's why I like a process that
Yeah.
you're owning, you're stepping in, you're walking through it. It's not that you're not doing it, so to speak, on the courtroom steps where you're trying to get it all resolved under this very heated situation. And sometimes you don't make a decision that you can actually live with 3 years down the road. And that's really what you got to look at. What can I live with 3 years down the road? Because there's so much pressure on you. And I've been in, obviously I've been in both chairs. I've been in the chair as litigation support person. I've been in the chair, also been in the chair as a mediator, but I've also been in the chair as somebody who's actually going through the process. And you can feel like, oftentimes a client will tell me, I feel like I'm in a vice. And to a certain process, you're in a process, and that process can feel real vice-like. And if you make a decision in that space, you're just trying to get out of the vice, you may regret that decision. So, I
Yeah. Well,
kind of,
litigation is just, it's set up that way.
yeah,
It's not the attorney's fault or whatever. It's just the way the process is set up.
yeah, no,
You do have to make decisions under very high stress situations, and it is naturally adversarial, right? That's how we set it up. Our culture set it up. But
and
you make a great point about this is a grieving process that you're going through,
oh, yes, so
and
much grieving.
there's no right way for a person to grieve or wrong way for a person to grieve. It's just really to understand what your process is. I wanted to say one other thing too. I think that, at least when I do mediation, we still can use, and our clients can use, separate financial resources. So, for example, for the example you gave was if somebody's stealing from you, you can have a forensic accountant, which you are, right? Go
Mhm.
in, assess the situation, and as a third party neutral, bring that information into the mediation. So it becomes a fact inside the mediation, right? Here are the
Mhm.
facts about what the financial or forensic accountant found, and then deal with those facts inside of mediation. The DV question, and I want to bring this back up because it's so important, and it's really, I don't think we don't really have an answer yet about how well mediation works in DV
Mhm.
cases. Obviously, there are always triggers that you have to watch for. I personally think that it probably works the best in virtual mediation, like I do. I don't like you
Right.
do,
Right.
because there's no physical proximity. But even then, there are questions, and professionals disagree with, whether or not it works or we should be doing it. So that's still
So
up for
I think
debate.
it comes, yeah, and I think it comes back to a personality profile. So I will go to your example when you think there's theft. It sometimes that personality profile is somebody that doesn't tell the truth. And so they're not necessarily a great person to sit down with even in mediation because I think that you really need to have somebody on the other side who's at least willing to tell the truth. And so it can be more quasi. And so I I don't agree or disagree with you on that, because I think it really depends upon personalities then. And I think it depends upon the whole team, because then you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about a team. You're talking about a mediator. You're talking about a forensic accountant. You probably should have a psychologist involved. You're kind of talking about a team to get somebody through something like that. And it really, really depends upon the degree of personality disorder you might have on the other side. And that's the other thing you look at. If you have somebody who has an extreme personality disorder, then they may or may not be able to sit in the process. And so, and and I've had that go either way. It really depends upon the type, it depends upon the people, it depends upon your team. I'm a huge fan of mediation in intimate relationship, because you got to talk to somebody when this is done. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to talk to the legal process. I'm going to tell you that my experience has been, and the experience of many clients I have worked with has been, that it is a process that can burn all the bridges down.
Yeah.
And once the bridges have been burned down, and once you have a toxic opinion of the person on the other side, and once you have reached that level of 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 dislike for that person, that's almost impossible to come back from, even
Yeah.
if that person on the other side later has regrets. I mean, there are things you can do to a person that you don't get to come back from and have a relationship with them after the fact. And that is much more likely to happen in a litigated environment than it is in sort of this sort of mediated, quasi collaborative environment where the client has time to make their own choices, and
Yeah.
nobody is putting that kind of pressure on them where you have to choose today. You have 30 minutes to make a decision. When somebody, because oftentimes when you're given a lot of data, and you don't live that data, like if you're a lawyer, you live the law. If you're a finance person, you live financial data. Well, if you're somebody whose background is not either one of those things, when you come in a process, you're given a lot of data and you're given a lot of options. And sometimes you just need time to sit with it. You need time to let it integrate and to truly feel like what is the best thing for you. And that isn't something you necessarily get in one meeting. It's really sometimes something you need to sit with and come back with and maybe ask more questions. Maybe you
Yeah.
had questions you got. Maybe you're coming in, and this happens all the time. And for a long time, I ran a tax practice, and I will tell you that nobody rarely ever came in understanding the tax law. They would give me something that somebody told them. Well, this is just like that. Whether, finance is a complex structure. And so you hear little tidbits, and there's all these talking points that people get. And those talking points may not apply to them in their situation. So sometimes you have to really talk with them about expectations, because they may have false data and false information in their mind based upon something they heard, read, or said. And I think the other beauty of this process, at least for me as a service provider, is that no two people are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the process is always going to be a little bit different if you're going to make your client the number one priority. That doesn't say we're not going through a process, we're not going through a template. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that because each person's model is different, it may look different for each particular group or people that go through.
Yeah. You made a comment about creating irreparable relationships, right?
Yeah.
Through conflict, and whether that's in a litigated setting, in a just a regular everyday living setting, or even in mediation, that can happen. And I find, I'm going to give a plug for estate mediation, because one of that because I have personal experience with that. And in particular, if people are mediating after someone has passed, it is
Yeah.
it is super easy for relationships are very, very fragile. People are all over the place and understand what's happening, because it's literal grief. it's not grief of a divorce. This person is never coming back. So they are definitely
Right.
irreconcilable with regard to that person, and then they become irreconcilable with regard to the beneficiaries or siblings or whatever family members. And that's where I think mediation really shines, whether it's financial, and often in this setting it is financial, right? Issues that are separating people.
Yeah.
But mediation is really a super helpful tool there because it's a chance to prevent those fragile relationships from cracking entirely. And if they do, they're far more likely to never be repaired.
I,
So
you know,
I give you kudos
I
for that.
agree. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think that, we're talking about probate here. We're talking about, an estate, or, you can even bring it into succession planning. How do you want to move forward? And, to the degree that you can do some of this post you losing a parent or anything like that, it can be really helpful. Sometimes I've just sat down with a family and said, this is how the will is going to play out. This is how the trusts are going to play out. Is this what your intention is? Is
Mm-hmm.
this what you desire to actually happen? Because, what I see happen all the time with legal documents as a CBA is I'll ask, where's your legal documents? Oh, it's in a drawer or a box. Let me go find that piece of paper. I'm not quite sure what it says. Or sometimes what somebody thinks it says is not what the document actually says. So even that process of sitting down with people, which should be done in some sort of mediated environment, by the way, even in that process before, because you have so many people in the room, it's better if you've got a facilitator. So we're talking about facilitative mediation here. So even if you've got that, even if you've got that going on, you can sit down with people and you can show them the movie. And I have found that's very powerful. That's one of the most powerful engagements I ever did, was a succession planning engagement where we sat down and said, this is how all the trusts are going to play out through generations. This is how long it's going to last. This is how it's affecting everybody. This is how it affects that third generation. And just kind of let everybody see how it was playing out. Then they could decide if they wanted to make changes or not prior to sort of a kingpin moment, right? Prior to there being a death. Prior to that, it's hard to do after the fact, but I am all for doing that before, because sometimes you just don't understand how all the, because you're getting through that, just getting a will done and getting the trust done, it's so complex. You're dealing with high level complex tax and financial issues on top of a really emotional thing. And that's really the issue, because sometimes you don't hear it because there's too much emotion for you to be able to hear it in that moment, which
Mm-hmm.
is why you're going to say it 3 or 4 times, because you want to be sure that it can be heard. It's really exciting stuff. For me, it's really exciting stuff, because you can actually prevent that moment from happening in a courtroom. If you can, even especially if you can get people together prior to anything happening. If you can get them together afterwards, I'm all for that as well. Especially if you've got a lot of money in an estate, that is just that is just for certain people in our profession, obviously not you and obviously not me, a lot of money means a lot of fees. And so if you can get somebody in an environment where you're going to do this in a way that you're being responsible about the fees that are being charged, you're being responsible about how the information is being delivered, so that individuals can have a full and thorough understanding. Sometimes you have a psychologist in the room, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just have a highly trained facilitator. It really depends. If you can get people in a room to dialogue, I and there is nothing in there, you can create safe space. I'll just say it that way. You can create safe space around it. You can create some really powerful moments, not only from getting solutions that are good, sound financial solutions, but in creating some emotional breakthroughs between siblings who may have saw something completely different and just had different viewpoints of how it came together. It's if you can sit down, I can sit down sometimes with a husband and spouse who we've got a highly creative, one spouse is highly creative and one spouse is an engineer, and just getting them to see how they see things differently sometimes they're saying the same things. They're just saying it with different languaging, which is to your point about communication being
Yeah.
such a major point. And I think communication is a major point to everything we do, actually, right? I've also taught. I've taught tax to individuals that wanted to be CFPs, and what I will tell you is that I could have different classrooms, and I had to teach differently to the different classrooms. And who knew? I'm teaching the same thing, but different people receive it differently. And it's important
Funny,
that
and
you
it's in
that you're paying
a
attention.
group. Is
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? And it's in a group.
Yes.
So groups will take on a certain process of
Yes.
understanding. That's super interesting.
Yes.
And I think that's very true
Yeah.
for family members, right? Or employees in a company. There's like this culture of communication, culture of understanding, culture of what's acceptable and what's not. And the beauty of what we do is break down those models and parse through the pieces and try and come up with agreement. This is a super great place
Absolutely.
to, sorry, this is a really
No,
great
you're
place
fine.
to take a brief break. It's about 1 minute break, and then we will be right back to tell you a little bit more about where you can find Loreine and the services she provides. Hang on one
Great.
second.
Sure.
Blend Mediation is a global mediation company dedicated to empowering people everywhere to create resolution together. We provide faster, more affordable, more fulfilling ways to get to resolution. We are also an intentional sponsor of Breakthrough Today because of our shared belief that healthy communication creates healthy people, healthy communities, and ultimately, a healthier planet. We hope you enjoy the content we bring you. If there's a subject you would really like to know about, please visit our website at blendmediation.com and leave us a note. Until our next episode, take care of yourself and those around you.
Hi.
We're back. In the few minutes we have left, what I was hoping we could cover is the different types of services. So literally if client has a particular issue, what can you service them with? And we can go through and tell us them. And then what contact information can people reach you at? I mean, you're on
So
the Blend Mediation website, so that's a first plug, right? Blend
correct,
Mediation,
right.
Lorraine's information is there along with contact information. But beyond that, where would you like people to?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, just under Loreine Smith. You can contact me always on LinkedIn. You can contact me directly on my website, which is Lions Edge Advisory. And it's the word Lions, the word Edge, it's one word, and then advisory.com. And you can reach me through the website, actually, if you'd like, or you can go to info@lionsedgeadvisory.com and send me an email that way. And then I will get back back to you from that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can reach out to me. Again, I do various forms of coaching. And I think that the majority of people that I meet, the majority of clients that I meet, are in some kind of level of transition. So that could be anything from you've unfortunately lost your spouse, you're going through a divorce, you've inherited a large sum of money, but you tend to be going through some kind of change. There's some process or change that you're going through. That tends to be where I meet most of my clients. I also do consulting, and coaching is kind of a mixture of coaching and consulting because you have to do some kind of analytic you have to have some kind of analytic knowledge to help to assist somebody with their finances. You can't really work cold. Um, then I do financial neutral services, and a financial neutral is a support person that comes into a litigated environment. Normally, you can have a mediator and a financial person comes in and is the neutral and talks about the financial components of the separation or the estate. But you're not necessarily, when you're a neutral, you're not acting as a facilitator. Your job is to be neutral to the information, and your job is to be loyal to the information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then I also do business valuation work as well. And then, succession planning and a few things like that. So mainly I do a lot of work with people who are in transition. That is pretty much my niche. Even the valuation work, you're looking at selling your company. Again, you're in some kind of layer of transition. And to me, that is the highest, that's a lot, there's a lot of complexity in that. And there's a lot of complexity around communication. There's a lot of complexity around finance. And I find that work very fascinating. It requires the most of me to do well.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what we look for, right? A job that
Right.
requires the most of us and that we're
Yeah.
passionate about and that empowers people. Well, I have enjoyed this, and I think we shared a lot of information. And, one of the things I try and do is give my clients as many resources as they can handle, right? And while they don't have to choose all of them, they pick and choose. And this is a great piece because we just started sort of building out this financial part of our website and the financial resources. So I thank you so much for being on here. Thank you for your service to clients and to people in general. I think we're all trying to do good work, and I did.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to express my opinion on things, and I enjoyed the conversation, and I really like what you're doing. I really like what blended mediation is doing, and we're moving to a virtual world, and there's a lot of safety to be able to have dialogue in the safety of your own home when you're having it, or your office, but you're in your own personal space. So I really like what you're doing, and I'm a real fan of it. So thank you for having me, and thank you for making finance a part of the mediated process. It actually is. So it's good to see it being done.
And to look for more material from Loreine, she will be submitting some blog material that you'll be able to access on our website. We'll push it out to our members. And again, her website, lionsedgeadvisory.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Loreine. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
You too. Take care. Bye.